So my name is Anat Ben Salmon. I'm a psychotherapist. Today I'm going to speak to you about two-track conceptualization of the structural mechanisms of OCD disorder. And what we did is I'll first present my team of interdisciplinary research team together with Ofer Erez, who's also psychotherapist working with families, children and adolescents with a lot of anxiety disorders, including OCD and a lot of addictions as well. And Dr. Anna Kristalilov, who is a gynecologist, and she's also a co-researcher and studying psychotherapy with us in order to integrate her work of the body of the woman and girl together with psyche. And during COVID times, we surprisingly realized that a lot of our OCD patients actually got better. And we tried to think what happened. So how can it be? Because the tension is way up, but the OCD symptoms appear to be much, much better than we used to see. And we have a lot of those patients. We try to understand what's happening, and we try to conceptualize the OCD disorder together with connected somehow to addictions. We think that understanding the structural mechanism of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, requires a profound investigation into the etiological roots, development, and progress. Many of the features of OCD are also, in our sense, related to both primary, secondary, and cross addictions. So when we talk about OCD, actually, we're talking about anxiety disorder. People who suffer from it experience recurring and intruding sensation, thoughts, and ideas, which we call obsessions, that make them feel impelled to conduct repetitive actions in order to lessen their fear, which we call compulsions. These repetitive cycles significantly interfere with the person's daily functioning, his health, his social relationships, his parental functioning. Everything is hurt by that. It's a really, really harsh disorder. So if we talk about a little bit of how much we see it, so it's the prevalence is about 2% of the general population worldwide. We can see it's equally common among both men and women. The average age of onset is 19, in which 25% of cases occur before the age of 14. 1/3 of affected adults first experience symptoms in childhood. So many researchers thought about OCD and how it develops, and we refer to Colin and Rivera research, who actually supported by a lot of other research, that OCD develops from strong anxiety aroused by recurring threatening thoughts. So we're thinking about being very, very aroused and very anxious, mostly 24 hours a day by our thought. For the observer from the outside, the conviction of the OCD sufferer in his threatening thought appears unfounded. Like we cannot understand why he's so stressed. But the sufferer, the patient, is convinced that the threat is very real and he possesses practical implications. So the person will think about a car accident and he'll experience that the car accident is happening just because he thought about it. So it's really fearful because we know that a lot of thoughts come into our mind all the time. And while we're afraid that our thoughts are going to become real, it's really concerning. So the sufferer develops internal conviction, almost a mystical belief concerning actions that he or she should conduct in order to prevent the realization of danger resulting from threats. So if a person is convinced that because of he thought about death or a car accident, it's going to happen, he might develop some ritual in order to prevent the event from happening. The process provides with illusionary feeling of control over external occurrences, which he believes to be very real. So he believes that if he does some ritual, he actually prevented the strategy he just thought about from happening. So that followed, of course, by immediate relief, because if the thought was real for him and that was supposed to happen is somebody to die, while he's doing the ritual, he actually prevents the death, actually saves that person he was thinking about, and he feels relieved, of course, all of a sudden. So we thought about two tracks for how we can think and maybe theorize and see how we can later treat OCD. And we took two tracks of conceptualization, in which in first track, we thought about the need of control as the origin of the development of OCD structure and mechanism. So OCD patterns involve both anxiety, feeling of helplessness, and the need to experience a sense of control. So if I'm controlling my thinking, I'm controlling the world. So child raised by anxious parents, growing up in an environment of intrusiveness and overprotection, experience is a restriction of self-sense control over his life. So if we have anxious parents, they might restrict self-control from the child by overprotecting him from big love and wanting to protect him and save him. They actually prevent him from feeling control over himself. In the second track, we actually thought about that people become accustomed and later on even addicted to a certain level of stress and the biochemical homeostasis of neuroendocrine hormones and cytokines related to it. So if the person grows up during childhood in the environment which the parents provide, is anxious, it becomes the baseline homeostasis stress level for the child, in which he feels at home, he feels comfortable. So he's used to a high arousal all the time. That's what he knows. So that's the level of stress he's accustomed to. And when that child grows up and the circumstances change, people tend to revert their baseline homeostasis stress levels. They want it back, even though it's really stressful, but for them, that's all they know. So this might be achieved for a variety of actions of thoughts, obsessions that possibly provide the fastest and the strongest initiators of stress hormone response. So actually, we thought that if the person wants to give himself back that level of arousal, obsessions, thinking, and being afraid is actually the fastest way to achieve this arousal level. So if we look at the both tracks, we see anxious parents as the origin of the development. In both tracks, we can see that the child experienced high level of stress, loss of control. In first track, he needs to maintain a sense of control by developing OCD and by that maintaining the sense of control. In the second level, they need to maintain the stress level. So we're actually thinking about the psyche and the physiological mechanisms working together in developing OCD and actually behaving as an addiction cycle. So in OCD, a person might intentionally or unintentionally, consciously or less consciously, repeatedly recall anxiety-inducing thought, which repeatedly leads to that familiar homeostasis of stress. So he recalled the thought, and that gives him the pleasure of stress. And if the thought is morally unacceptable or suggests a forthcoming potentially traumatic event, it obsessively occurs in his mind. The person believes that it's real is reinforced because it's coming back over and over again, providing with that experience. The person develops a protocol of activities, compulsions, that he must compulsively conduct in order to prevent the imminent disaster from occurring. Compulsions are derived from the omnipotent position, providing the person with the illusion of control over circumstances. That's something we get addicted to. Addictions. The addiction, as we know so far, are biopsychosocial disorders. The repeated use of drugs or persistent engagement in activities such as gambling or compulsions, I'll say, although it involves harming the self and others, and a lot of research has been done on that. One of them is by Grind and Chamberlain in 2020. The addictions are actually divided into primary addiction and secondary addiction, in which primary addictions we think about behavior that provides the individual with immediate desirable sensation, encouraging him to repeat it. So he gets pleasure from a certain drug and he wants to get this pleasure back in order to achieve the same goal. The activity provides with the person with adrenaline rush, again, if we talk about arousal, which elevates the stress homeostasis, which he's accustomed to, accompanied by a sense of excitement and euphoria. The secondary addictions are temporary relief for a person's troubles or trying to forget problems for a limited period of time. So it's actually just running away from issues by trying some drug or some activity such as gambling or obsessive compulsive behavior in order to not to deal with certain issue that is much more stressful for them. It might be happening consciously. It also might be unconscious for some people. The addictive behaviors or substance abuse is used to correct another issue. It's not the biggest problem. It's just an attempt to correct some other issues and to avoid the feeling of sadness or stress. The secondary addiction can easily occur when a person rehabilitates from an unwanted primary addiction, replacing it with another, which is much more acceptable to him. And if we look at OCD from that perspective, we can see that OCD compulsions can comprise a secondary addiction, replaces the primary by a chemical addiction to the stress-related state, achieved from the initial troublesome thought, which is obsession. So we can see that the person gets anxiety, he feels sense of loss of control, experienced by physical stress. He tend to do compulsive action compulsions, which provides him a sense of control, by that reducing the anxiety. The compulsions have no logical connection whatsoever to the initiating emotional issue or functioning, serving the function of preoccupying the person and preventing him from thinking about anxiety-provoking issues. Therefore, in this way, OCD provides an escape from an internal anxiety. On a physiological level, what's happening is the stressogenic events, physical or infectious attacks on the body, awakening the neuroendocrine stress system, accompanied by cytokine immune responses. Cytokines we know from COVID, we heard a lot about it, and we'll see how it comes to it. Cortisol acts to reduce the immune response, which would otherwise cause harm to the individual. Over time, usually we learn how to cope with these events. We have some control over when to awaken the response, to what extent, and when to switch it off. We can get, previously, the previous lecture was talking about relaxation techniques. CBT techniques are very useful. We can talk to ourselves, saying or visualize, and get our levels of stress less when we decide to and when we know how to do it, through conscious control of our hormonal response. In a normal environment, the child gradually learns to moderate the stress response and turn it off in a timely manner. States of chronic stress, however, such as growing up with an overprotective parents with an anxious environment chronically, can cause emotional disorders when the child grows up, such as OCD. A state of hypercortisolism develops, and it's related to overuse of the stress response or an indifferent response due to intense frequency of stressogenic events. So due to the interaction between neuroendocrine and immune system, the state of hypocortisolism might lead to the development of autoimmune disorders or other physical illness. When the physiological neuroendocrine stress system does not awaken adequately in the face of external stressogenic stimulus, it might be necessary for the individual to create a sufficiently stressogenic situation to induce the required adrenaline rush, analogous to raising the dose of the addictive drug as we know it. The required adrenaline rush might be achieved either by an addiction or by anxiety disorder, such as OCD. Before I finish, I just want to go back to the COVID situation and what we saw, that while COVID was really, really stressful for everybody, actually the people who had OCD had enough adrenaline from the actual stress. They could leave their compulsions and obsessions a little bit behind because they had enough of the stress from COVID. Thank you for listening. This article was published already a couple months ago, so you can see the reference and read a lot more about it. Thank you for listening. Hold on.
Thank you, Dr. Ann, for sharing your views. Now, I would like to call next plenary speaker, Dr. Sunanda Govindar, to give her talk on nurses' knowledge, attitude, and practices on use of restraints at state mental health care settings and impact of in-service education program. Dr. Sunanda, please go ahead with your presentation.
Yes, madam. Thank you. Hope I am audible.
Yes, we are able to hear you.
Just I am connecting my slides, madam.
Okay.